I'm David Wright. I'm an engineer, and about 3 years ago I started wondering, well, how does gravity work exactly? And so I started digging into it, and found out, wow, matter bend space. Where was I at on that one? And so I want to know, okay, cool, that sounds good. Which way does it bend it? What's that look like? What is that exact interaction between matter and space? And researched it, of course found all the relativity equations, all that stuff, but I'm looking at diagrams and I'm like, yeah, that could explain an orbit, but it really to me doesn't explain how the everyday gravity that we have works. So I was a little skeptical about the whole thing, but so I thought, well, how would it work then to make everything that we see happen the way it does? And so my friend Greg and I, we came up with our own idea of what that interaction might be. And so we thought, oh yeah, it would do this, it would do that. So we started writing things up, made a bunch of diagrams, and eventually ended up making a presentation, made a video about everything we'd come up with. So we're like, okay, we need to have a physicist look at this, because neither one of us were strong in physics. And so a friend of mine, that I work with, his name's Rick, his son was getting his PhD in physics, so I asked Rick to have his son look at our video. And yeah, he came back with, we did a lot of talking, but we didn't prove anything. And he's exactly right. I mean, anybody can just say anything. You really need to have some proof of something. And so yeah, I set about trying to figure out how to prove what I think happens between matter and space, and that's how we ended up here and with all this stuff. And so this video will be about the proof that I've come up with, an actual demonstration. So the whole experiment here has to do with gyroscopic effect, and if you do research on that, there's tons of it. There's the math and conservation of angular momentum. But if you really apply the law of inertia to a rotating disk, the things you see, just don't seem to add up. And so during my research, I do want to point out one article that I think is worth mentioning, and that is Tony Rothman. I really appreciate him writing this. It's called The Forgotten Mystery of Inertia. Google it. It's under American Scientist, and it's excellent, and I encourage you to read it. If you call it up, you'll see, first thing you see is this big picture. This is Einstein and Ernst Mach. Both of them tried to figure out why a gyroscope pretty much does what it does, because technically, with what we know, it should not. And I built this to kind of give a hands-off, because in a lot of the videos, everybody's like manipulating the gyroscope, or it's hanging from a rope and they bump it or something. And so I just wanted to examine the gyroscopic action hands-free, something you don't bias, something you don't interfere with, but yet you can see it all. And this pretty much demonstrates kind of exactly what the current known forces are, or at least what everybody thinks. And so it's mounted here on this Lazy Susan, and if I rotate the Lazy Susan a little bit, the gyroscope kicks. And if I rotate the opposite direction, it kicks the other way. But notice that if I keep rotating, it doesn't flip all the way over, it just kicks, because once it readjusts, then the angle's all different. And all this is done in math. And if you want to understand that, look up conservation of angular momentum. And a good video is Walter Lewin. I love that guy. I mean, if you want to learn about physics, watch his videos and his lectures, because he brings in real things and he does real experiments, and then goes out and does all the math and physics. If you watch his on gyroscopic effect, he's got this big bicep wheel and he's demonstrating this, and he's got this big wheel spin and he jerks it and it kicks up. He just hesitates for a little bit and he says, yeah, that's very non-intuitive. And I love that description, because really it shouldn't happen at all if you take inertia just as it is. And so I started taking my model for the interaction of matter and space, because if you take inertia, this just should not happen. And I'm going to make a second video to explain all that and all the current ideas for that. But right now, this video is just about the proof. And so basically, when I try to apply my model to this, it was so confused I had to actually build a three-dimensional kind of semi-working model. And then once I started looking at that and adjusting it, I'm like, oh crap. Wow, okay, well that would explain this action that I'm seeing here. But it would also predict that anytime you take a rotating disc and just rotate it in free space, then the disc should slow down. So it's not just the centripetal force of the metal going out, it's not just the tangential forces to the disc, it's also a component of force that would slow the disc down. And so I tried to research that, I couldn't find that anywhere. I mean, if anyone can find that and send that to me, please send me a link on this video. And specifically what I'm looking for, and I've looked for hundreds of hours at everything I can find till I'm sick of looking. But specifically what I want is something about the forces on the disc itself. And I want to see if that component in the direction of rotation, against rotation, exists. So I couldn't find it, so I'm like, okay, well there's something previously not known. If I could prove that there is always a force that will try to slow this down, then yeah, I've proven something that isn't previously known. Maybe it is, but if it is, it's so buried, I can't find it. And so what I did, before I spent all this money, I'm like, yeah, I know what I got to build, but that's going to be really expensive. Before I commit to that, maybe I could figure out a different way to do that. Okay, so the disc will slow down. So I'm thinking like, oh, maybe if I lock this in place and spin it around, somehow if I got a tachometer and I can see the speed of it, then yeah, I can measure it. But I'm like, yeah, that's going to be hard to do because its rotation is going to rotate, da-da-da. But anyways, I'm like, well, duh, I'm an electrical engineer. If that disc slows down, the motor current will go up. And so I got another one of these and I drilled in here and I tapped into the circuit and stuck my meter in there and I stuck this one in here and I laid up the meter and all that crap here and I fashioned up a belt and my drill and I sit there and I started spinning it and I watched the current and it just shot up. So that gave me a positive indication, but it's not a good experiment because the bearings in these things are sleeve bearings. They're okay for just spinning, but really if you put any side thrust on them, the friction's really going to come up. And I couldn't tell really if it's the friction in the bearings or proof of my interaction of matter and space. So I had to build this big expensive thing and use some really good bearings, and I did a little clip with everything disconnected so you could just see some of that design. Before I do that though, I do want to give a shout out to A1 Machine Shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They saved my bacon on this. I was having delays at other machine shops, just waiting and waiting and waiting because even though this is expensive, to them it's not a lot. This is a big oil and gas state, so they're doing big dollar stuff. So I kind of got shoved aside a lot, but man, not when I found A1. Jason, he works there, he great, just took care of me. Not one time did I bring anything in that they didn't have it the next day. It's like really freaky. But anyways, they're great there, so I want to give a shout out. Now I want to go to a clip kind of showing you this whole disc, because everything's about this disc right here. The big money in this thing is the wheel, and I kind of wanted to show that detached from the motors so you can get a good view of it. This has come out of a plate of A36 steel. It has been precision ground. You can see the grind marks on both sides to be as flat as possible, and it has been machined round as possible, and then the shafts made and machined as a unit to get as little eccentricity as possible. This thing is pretty much dead on. Now, the other key thing is that in this experiment, what I'm going to do is get this wheel accelerated, and then I'm going to rotate it like this. When it does that, it's going to kick. Okay, but I'm not going to allow it to, unlike the XP1. So we're going to hold it in place, it's going to rotate and create a kick this way. What you got to do is take into account that it's going to do that because you don't want friction screwing up your readings. So I want to talk a little bit about the bearings. They are inside these pillow blocks, and they are actually skateboard bearings, but really good ones. If you watch some of these guys skateboarding, you know that You know, they're supporting a human, they're going down the road at incredible speeds, and they swivel and take side loading. So these are exceptionally good bearings. They're actually RAV bearings, but they're buried inside here, and I just want to give a little demonstration as to how little friction there is, and you can see it rolling there. But the other important point is this is an independent system from the motors. So the motors are just going to be slid up here and attached with flexible couplings. I want to keep this as independent as possible, and you can see from the rolling there. And even with side loading, I mean, you can't do this in film, but I'm pulling on it, and there's like, yeah, you can't even tell there's a friction change. Plus, there's no side thrust, so that, you know, any type of movement like this, it's not going to shove into the motors and add any type of friction whatsoever. Okay. So let's get on with the proof. I'm going to go ahead and get this thing started because the way I designed this, that disc is extremely heavy for those small motors, because I want to guarantee that I would see a reaction out of them. So since they're so small, they have a hard time getting it going. So what this is think of this as an electrical 3-speed transmission. So when the motors are completely stopped, they draw a lot of current. They're expected to get going, but if they don't speed up, then they'll overheat. So I just made this, just some stepping resistors, just to give it kind of an easy start. So what I was saying earlier about back EMF, you can see this meter set in milliamps, and so right now we're at about 600 milliamps, but as this speeds up, the motor current will drop. And so it takes a while, and this will eventually drop to around 230 milliamps once it gets up to full speed. So while it's cranking up, I just want to quickly go over the electrical setup. Everything's 12 volt. I got 2 batteries. You can see they're physically separate. This battery feeds a variable voltage device to drive this motor at various speeds, and that's what's going to turn the turntable. And then this battery is strictly for the gyro drives. That way when I crank up the turntable, it does not affect the current flow here. And we're at about 300 milliamps, still got a little ways to go. We'll comment, well, I spent 6 months building this thing, so I kept having referring to it as like, for a long time I said like the gizmo, but eventually I gave it a name. I call this the XP1000. Basically that's the first thing that popped in my head. So this is the XP1000, and then the little prototype gizmo we call the XP1. So we are now at about 250, it's about there. So the closer it gets to top speed, the longer it'll take to settle out. And so the whole point of this is that once I start the turntable, the disc should, according to my model of interaction of matter space, should start to slow down. And so once the disc starts to slow down, the current will start going up. Now it will take a little while because look how long it took it to wind up, so it's going to take a while for that effect to be present. So we're at about 212, it's going on down a little bit. Now we're at 200. So anyway, that's low enough, it's just going to go down, but it takes a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and just crank this up and get this rolling. And you won't see the effect immediately. I'm just going to go ahead and crank it up. So just watch this number, and what you will see is this will just slowly climb on up. And one of the reasons it's slow is because I'm barely turning this thing. It's going, the gyro itself is going about 1,000 RPM, and the turntable's going about 40. So if I turn the turntable faster, this would become more apparent. And are you keeping this in? Okay. So we'll give it a little while. So here you can see it now slowly creeping up, creeping up, creeping up. And that will continue probably to about 400 milliamps. That's what I've done in the past. So and we started out a little over 200 milliamps, and now we're up to 330, 340, 350, and then when it gets close to its equilibrium, that, you know, it's just going to take longer and longer to settle out. But what you got to think about is scale. Okay, so we started out around just above 200 milliamps without turning into free space, and now we're up around about 340, 350. So it looks like it's settling out at about, maybe we'll call it 330. So we increased maybe 120 milliamps just by spinning a free space. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but from 200 to 120, you know, so it's taken, that's over a 50% increase. So it looks like it's settling out about another extra 120 milliamps, and that's what I wanted to prove. So, and in reverse, I'm going to slow this down. And then, so we relieve the component of force, slowing the disc down. So then you watch it and it will slowly speed on up. And we'll end up back down around our 200 level. So to me, that's proof, and I will explain more in part 2. So I'll just sit here in just a second, and you can see it headed back down to where it was. Now, just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and kill it and show you how free these bearings are. So now I've shut the whole thing off. That is coasting, and it takes it about 2 to 3 minutes to coast all the way down. So, and that's even driving the motors; they're still hooked up. So, okay, that's it.